I'm Dr. Lunsford, and in this lesson I want to talk about the processes as they relate to mentoring relationships, and in particular, the stages of those relationships. Part of what we want to think about with processes are how we create some reflective spaces. And this graph is useful to think about. We have our normal activity, we engage in a mentoring conversation, and some framing begins to take place. What's happening? What are the goals of the person? How's it been going? So now, because of reflective listening and asking good questions, you're helping them to engage in what's called an implication analysis, thinking about what's going on. And through your questions, they develop some insight. And as a result of that insight, they're able to reframe with your help and questions, well, what do you think about this now that we've discussed it? And generate some options that can lead to action. So this is what we want to have happen in these mentoring conversations. And the question is, how do we get there? Well, part of what I want to talk to you about are the stages. Now, in my text, I wrote about 4 stages. They're from Kathy Cram in the United States. Since writing my textbook, I have also thought about what my colleague David Clutterbuck talks about, and he uses 5 stages. So I'm going to discuss both of those for you and show you how they map onto one another. His 5 stages are getting started, clarifying direction, heightened mutual learning, winding up, and moving on. So his first 2 stages are what Kathy Cram would have talked about as initiation, getting started in that relationship. Well, let's take a look at what that means. You want to plan your first meeting. What is it that you want to achieve in your first meeting? How can you get that relationship off to a good start to make it be sustainable? At that first meeting, you really want to think about what values do we have in common. This is the chemistry meeting. What can we both learn and achieve from this relationship? And then some logistics. What's the best place to meet? What ground rules do we want to set? And how will we make sure that we get the most out of our mentoring relationship? You want to think about this as your learning journey. Consider your own and the other person's. What are their ambitions for them for the future, the short term, long term? What about formative experiences and what really shaped you and what did you learn from those experiences, good and bad? What about people who have significantly influenced you? Have a discussion about themes and patterns in your experiences and discuss the difficult choices and values you use to make those choices, learning from mistakes, and your sense of the person that you aspire to become. It's really important to ask your mentee that or to think about it yourself. Not the job you want, but who do you want to be? And then what makes you feel most and least fulfilled in your work? These kinds of questions in that first meeting will really help you get off to a great start that's going to promote some reflection. Some relationships and formal programs also require a mentoring contract, and it'd be at this first meeting that you'd want to set that up. And these are some of the things that contracts often have. Responsibilities, ideas about confidentiality, logistics, are notes permissible? How are you going to give and receive feedback? What is your preference there, and how to measure your progress? Let's take a look at stage 2 according to Clutterbuck, which Cram would still say is in the initiation stage, clarifying direction and purpose. Well, what do we mean here? Here we're really focusing on the idea of goals. What's the change in circumstance that's desired? What about identity? What might success look like for the mentee and mentor? How can we make sure we're focused on these right goals? And how will we check if goals have changed? Talented employees want to know these things from organizations, and it's important to be prepared to have some answers for these questions. What are future opportunities? What skills and knowledge will become more important in the future? What track record will be valued? What's a reasonable time in a job role? And what constitutes talent here? These are things that you really want to be prepared to answer, because those things then relate to success. What does the word success mean to you? And I suggest that you answer that for yourself and ask your mentees. Identify 3 words that describe the essence of success for you. In fact, you might want to pause for a moment and write yours down. Success then is achieving what you value, and that's what it's all about in a mentoring relationship. Here's another tip for thinking about goals. When you work with a mentee and come up with a goal, you might want to ask them on this nice scale, 1 to 10, again, courtesy of my friend David Clutterbuck, from 1, how committed are you over my dead body? I'm not keen, all the way to I am determined to achieve this whatever the cost. It's really important when your mentee is setting a goal or you're discussing goals is ask them, how committed to this goal are you? Phase 3 is heightened mutual learning, and Kathy Cram would call this stage collaboration stage. Well, what do we mean when we talk about collaboration? This is mentee preparation that might happen. What do I need to do beforehand to think about issues? Can I bring some documentation about what's been going on? How do I think my mentor might help? And what can I do to help them help me? In the mentoring conversation, it's critical that the mentor establish a relaxed professional learning environment. In fact, I suggest you maybe not meet in an office. That can convey some power, and you want to have this be an effective developmental relationship. Make sure that summary is happening by the mentor. You want to rephrase from time to time to make sure that the person feels that you get what they're saying. This is what building rapport is all about, and really build that self-belief in the mentee, showing that you have confidence in their ability to think it through and helping them to come up with some solutions that are congruent with their values. And then ask the mentee to summarize how it's going. Here's some important tips about challenging. If in your mentoring conversations you're always agreeing, it's not really the kind of mentoring relationship it could be. Part of mentorship is challenging ideas and ways of thinking. So agree at the start that you have some permission to challenge. But make sure, here's some tips, take away the blame and the judgment. So say, help me to understand this, instead of just saying, gosh, that seems like you shouldn't have done that. Give them space to reflect on critical feedback. They don't need to answer right now. Give them some time to think about it. Here's some other tips. Talk about their behavior. What were you trying to achieve when you said that to John, rather than you just behave like a bully. Make sure you challenge assumptions, not their intellect. What assumptions were you making about this issue, rather than did you really think that was clever or smart to say? Their perceptions, not their judgment. How did you see that meeting, rather than, wow, you really lost it in that meeting, didn't you? That's a judgment about the person. And then challenge their values, not their value. So how does that decision square with what you told me that you believe about X or Y? Rather than, I'd expect those kind of ethics from an ambulance chaser. The message here is challenge, but challenge gently. And when you end each mentoring session, during this you're going to have lots of sessions during this phase of it. You always want to ask, what issues have surfaced that we might want to talk about later? What insights have you had? What ideas are you taking away, and what intentions? The 4 I's: issues, insights, ideas, and intentions. Then in stage 4 and 5, this is what Kathy Cram calls separation is winding up, and termination is moving on. And it's important to pay attention to those phases. We often neglect them in a relationship, but it's important to have some time that you recognize the formal mentorship must end, and have discuss at least one meeting ahead how you plan to manage that ending. Create an agenda for that final meeting, and here's some things that you might want to cover: achievements, what you're thankful for. Do you want to continue in an ad hoc way? Allow a little time for grieving because you might not be meeting as frequently as before, and some celebration. Well, I hope these processes review has been helpful to you, and I hope that you'll try out some of these ideas in your upcoming mentoring relationships.